minutes. And I am going to tweet that we are live. Well, we are live. Hi, guys. Let's see. Hey, everybody. Hey, everybody. Welcome to an episode of Cinema Bias, or as I like to call it, this is called Cinema Bias on the Road, because we are currently on the road. I am VideoDrew. I'm one of your hosts. This is with me, as always, Alex Mack. And we have a new guest joining us tonight, and that is little baby Tulpa. There you go.
Cutie.
Our new little puppy that we are considering taking in. So we are visiting with her tonight, and she's saying hello. So you might intermittently see her pop up and do funny, cute things. So, you know, put some comments in the chat if you want to see Tulpa do things like eat or possibly pee places. Yay. Yay. But guys, we're really excited to have you come visit us on Cinema Bias, which is a weekly show where me and Alex sort of take turns introducing one or both of us to a new program that we haven't seen, a new movie that we haven't seen, sort of getting each other outside our comfort zones when it comes to cinema. And this month, because it is Black History Month, we decided to focus on Black feature films. Last week we had a double feature of, last week was Dolomite, and Dolomite is my name, correct? That was last week, yeah. So this week we are doing something that Alex has never seen. It is a little film. It's a little 2016 film. I think some of you might have seen it, called Get Out. Now, Alex, what is your bias? Why have you never seen Get Out?
I have a lot of bias when it comes to films like this. In particular, it's the horror genre, which is very much a genre that I didn't really watch all that much at all until last year, actively. And I'm actually very saddened I didn't watch it last year when I went through my horror binge of a ton of classic horror movies last October. So I'm a little disappointed in myself because I watched quite a few social thrillers, social horrors, but this one wasn't on the list. And so I'm very sad about that. But my bias, like, again, was I didn't grow up with horror movies. And like, I grew up a little bit later, like towards high school and college. I watched more supernatural thrillers like The Ring, Oculus, things like that. And
that's a great one.
Yeah, it's a great one. It's
really, you grew up on like movies like Silence of the Lambs and stuff, right? Like you grew up watching some scary stuff.
Well, absolutely. I grew up watching quite a few thrillers because my mom loves detective thrillers, noirs, things like that. And so movies like American Psycho, as well as Silence of the Lambs, are considered mother-daughter films.
Okay.
Oddly enough. And
it sounds like your mom
mother-daughter book club. But because they have a more realistic tone or in theory, or a focus on like serial killers and detective stories, those were much more films that I grew up with rather than supernatural, like actual horror movies. I didn't watch Exorcist till I was like 26 years old.
Yeah, there's always like that one or two big ones that you miss. And you're like, oh man, like how have I not seen that? Like for me, it was like David Lynch's Dune. I didn't see that until very recently. And I was like, what? How did I miss this one like David Lynch movie that also has sandworms and like a bunch of other crazy stuff? Like how did I miss it?
It's kind of weird how that kind of slips by every once in a while.
No, like, but you also said something interesting, I think, when we talked about before, which is that you avoided this movie specifically because you knew what was going to happen. You had been told what the result of this movie was. You'd sort of like heard about it because it was in the pulp culture zeitgeist. Because how do you know any movie if you don't know Jordan Peele's Get Out? And that you sort of have a bias against watching movies that you already know the ending of. And especially, I think, for this kind of movie, I could see how that could be a big thing. You're like, oh, well, you know, this, I don't know. Like, I remember watching this in theaters and I was with my friend James Urbaniak, who's like a very famous voice actor. He's on like Dr. Venture. And he was telling me, I think he had like auditions for maybe a role in this movie. Like maybe, I don't know, maybe like the Stephen Root character or something. Seems like he could have been like that character. But I remember watching this with him in theaters and he was like, okay, wait for it. And I did the Drew thing where like every 3 seconds I was like, no, wait, I think I know what's going on. I think it's this. And he's like, you're going to have to wait for it. And I was like, no, it's this. And he's like, it's not it either. You're going to have to wait for it. And like this movie was really exciting to watch in theaters and watching with audiences for the first time because everyone was just going, oh my God, like when the drop happened. And so I could see how if you missed out on that initial thing and yet you had to find out about the movie because you do, let's say, movie trivia for fun in your free time, that you might feel like it's not really a movie that you need to see. Like you might not feel like you need to see it because you know everything about it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's precisely the reason why I not only actively avoided this movie, but that's the reason why I have avoided quite a few other movies as well. I have not seen The Usual Suspects. I have not seen Seven.
Mm-hmm.
It took me ages to watch Gone Girl.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when it comes to these detective stories or these thrillers, especially social thrillers, where there's like this big, oh my gosh moment, a big plot twist, or a big moment that is really adds so much to it when you see part of that group environment, like in a theater.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you all band together and you like freak out, like like see Paranormal Activity
Yeah,
in theaters or something.
In the theater,
yeah, it's terrifying being part of watching it in a group for the first time. And I think I've just heard all these bits and pieces from this movie, and I knew going into it, I knew everything that happens. I knew the ending. I knew the beginning. I knew everyone in the family. I knew I knew the grandparent situation. I knew the party. I knew the symbolism. I knew everything with the tea, the cotton, the photography, the art aspect, the symbolism, everywhere. So as a result, I was like, what is there left for me to really get excited about if I just know so much about it already? It's like that takes away so much of the fun about a movie.
Well, I think that's gonna be an interesting argument, though, because there's so much of this movie is about on initial watch is about the surprise, but then I feel like that there's a reason that I wanted to come back and revisit it. There's a reason that you watch movies more than once as like people, because you have your favorite movies, and I think it's in large part because once you get over that initial shock, there's just so much to explore. And like you kind of want to revisit certain films not because it surprises you, but because they have something that you can like investigate or sort of take on your, you want to revisit. So I think there's going to be stuff interesting there for us to talk about, especially when it comes to race and ideas of class and race and, culture and millennials and dating. There's just so much here that we can get into. And I'm so excited to find that you finally watched it so we can discuss. Oh, baby.
Yeah.
This is the part I'm most excited about.
Well, I mean, this is what I really like about it is that this movie, even though it's such a new movie, it was released in 2017, it feels like a classic horror movie. And we're going to go into a little bit later about a lot of the direct influences regarding this movie, but it feels like an old film. Everything from the score, the cinematography, it felt like not frame for frame, a reflection of some classic films, but the intensity and tone of a bunch of film, a lot of these specific scenes remind me directly of some other classic films like The Exorcist, The Omen, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. That's not a horror movie, but
you're exactly right. It doesn't have to be a horror movie. I mean, some of these things are just classic. Let's see. This I think is one of the more famous images from the film, and it is a great one. This is this is just such an evocative, beautiful image of the star Daniel Kaluuya mid revelation of this beautiful, strange, crazy film. Do you know that we can get into it in a second, but you know that Jordan Peele, the director, provides the voice of only two characters in this film. Were you able to figure out who they were?
Who?
He's the voice on the TV that's saying the brain is a terrible thing to waste, and he's also the voice. He makes the noise of the dying deer in the beginning when the deer runs over and runs into their car, and it's making that weird, strange noise. That's Jordan Peele doing the voice of the deer.
Yeah, I would have never caught that. I'm almost sad I didn't catch the like you said, the line, the mind is a terrible thing to waste.
It was in all the trailers. So that was like the big thing about the thing. The trailers were looping. Like they had a really cool trailer where it's like a lot of different noises would loop together. And one of them was the best friend watching TV, and you would hear it. And the commercial, like it definitely puts you towards it, like, 'cause it was looping it over and over. And I was going, the mind is a terrible thing to waste. The mind is a terrible thing to waste. But I've been really excited about this all day. We're going to give you 60 seconds, Alex, and we're going to let you, in 60 seconds, tell us the plot of Get Out. So let me pull this up right here.
No pressure.
Unless you tell us the plot, aren't we? Aren't we? Yes, we are. Yes, we are. Yes, we are. Okay, hold on. Let's see.
All right, you ready?
What it sounds like. Well, sometimes asking how would you know what it sounds like? I feel like I know what a dying deer sounds like. It's also like the sound like in that movie Mama. Like it's like that. It's like a weird bleeding noise.
Oh yeah, that's kind of. It's like, it's kind of creepy. Yeah. It's almost like a motor, like a dying motor.
Okay, so let's see. I'm putting it up on the clock. Okay. Okay, we're gonna have 60 seconds, Alex. Why don't you tell me starting now?
Okay, Chris Washington is a 25-year-old photographer based in Brooklyn, New York. He has been dating this girl named Rose for the past 4 or 5 months. And they're like, hey, you know what it's time to do? Check out the family. And so they ended up going over to Rose's family's estate, essentially. And she's from a very wealthy upper middle class, very wealthy white family. I assume in upstate New York or Connecticut or something. And they're always dropping a lot of these hints, stuff about killing deer. They miss hints about his Obama should have been for a third term kind of thing. And they're definitely trying to make up for. They're trying to be really overcompensate, essentially. And
10.
He finds out as well that there's this big party with a bunch of their friends, and so they come over. Oh shit!
You know what? It's Get Out though. You know what? It's Get Out. So I'm gonna give you another extra minute. See if you can get past the party. Go ahead.
Gosh darn it! And so he ends up meeting a bunch of And so he ends up meeting a lot of really creepy characters that really actively make him uncomfortable. And then he realizes throughout the whole trip, his phone has been dying and someone has been disconnecting his phone. So he can't really reach the outside world. And he ends up finding people that were disappeared from New York City. It ended up being one was like a black jazz musician. Anyway, but he's like, hey, I'm uncomfortable. Everyone here is really being weird and uncomfortable. I kind of want to leave. And she's like, okay, let's leave. And he ends up getting hypnotized at one point by this woman's mom, Missy, and the girl, she ends up holding him. They end up holding him as a hostage. He ends up being essentially kidnapped. He's locked in the basement, and they try to cut out his brain so they can put a white guy inside his body because they're really fetishizing the black man, the black experience, essentially. Mm-hmm. And it's just about this family trying to take his body and put a white man into his body.
I feel like you got it in 2. I feel like you. I got it in 2. That was a good 2-minute explanation.
There's a lot of small details I really wanted to talk about, but I know I don't need to talk about it.
I feel like in one
I don't need to talk about the deer. I don't need to.
2 got there.
Yeah. But I know for a fact I do not need to talk about the deer at all. But
look, you did pretty good here. I think let's talk about a couple of the things you missed. Missy, there's a big part here about what's going on with Chris when in the beginning of the movie, like you said, the family hits a deer, or her and him hit a deer. He goes and stares at the deer. The deer is again voiced by Jordan Peele, the dying deer. But you see, and I picked this up on the first viewing too, that Chris has this very weird sort of glazed expression when he stares at the deer. And we find out afterwards that's because his mother was killed by a hit and run when he was very young, and he felt very frozen in place when she didn't come home. So that one, she didn't die right away, and so he could have saved her, but he felt frozen. He couldn't as a child, he couldn't go and tell anybody and get her help. He was just locked out. So that's sort of what that is. And there is I don't want to do this movie. And there's sort of an implication here that's sort of how he feels at different parts of this movie. But when Missy puts him under, when she hypnotizes him ostensibly to stop smoking, in fact, what she's doing is getting his mind prepped for this place called the sunken place. The sunken place is sort of like a place where you can't move, where it's sort of like having a night terror, I think is the equivalent I would have put to it. Like it's your body is locked and you can't move anywhere. And so that becomes a big part of the film. And I think it's a big metaphor for a lot of the themes in the film, this feeling of being totally trapped, of being frozen, feeling controlled by forces around you, feeling like because of the politeness of these white people that you don't have a place that you can say, I'm not comfortable with what's going on, because people are just being polite. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, and even in that feeling of when you are with someone that is like-minded, or someone you believe is a friend, or someone that actually is, or even a family member, and there is that where they're kind of looking like, what are you talking about? Like, it's almost like they're ghosting you, essentially.
Gaslighting.
Well, not
It's a lot
ghosting
of
you.
gaslighting.
Yes, gaslighting. That's what I was looking for. Yes, thank you. They're kind of gaslighting this experience where it could have this negative impact on you, or you could have a very different opinion or gut feeling about the situation. And sometimes you're in this situation where no one really understands, or not only understands your perspective, but no one really acknowledges your perspective. And that's a very terrifying feeling. Now, obviously, when it comes to race, that's a whole other situation. And I can talk. I think both you and I can talk about our personal experiences being in situations where we're in a male-dominated situation, but I can't imagine what he must have been like, because it's like times 50.
No, it's not even like it's times or not times. It's just sort of a different comparable experience. But I think of movies like this that are so revolutionary and so breakout work, especially because they connect with a white audience who, Jordan Peele is married to Chelsea Peretti, who is,
love her. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so he's married to Chelsea Peretti, whose brother is Jonah Peretti, who used to run BuzzFeed. So I always wondered after this movie, did that make Christmas very awkward when he went home that year? When he was like, this isn't about you guys. This isn't how I feel about you guys.
Totally. But, and I also thought it was kind of funny because Allison
Williams.
Williams. Yes, thank you. She actually they kind of look like they could be related.
Her and Chelsea
Peretti. They both have similar body types, hair, both tall, athletic.
Yeah.
And obviously very different faces.
On the Elton side, and I consider it as a Jew, but yes.
It's just similar enough where I would be like, what the fuck, dude?
Yeah. No, dude, it was because there's the whole thing about the brother, who, by the way, I love that actor. Oh god, Caleb Landry Jones, such a great actor. He's one of my favorite characters in this whole movie. He's one of my favorite performers, and he was definitely like him and Keith. I think were two of the newer actors that are introduced in this movie. This movie is filled with talent. Everyone from Catherine Keener from Being John Malkovich, which we can talk about in a moment. This movie does have a funny connection to Being John Malkovich in several different areas, which I picked up on because that's one of my favorite movies. Bradley Whitford, who's so great as the dad, who would have voted for Obama 3 times if he had had the chance. 3 times.
Best president in my lifetime, for sure.
Yeah, best president in my lifetime. This lets you things that NerdChronic have said about me, so that's great. And then there's Stephen Root, who we all know from other things like True Blood and Office Space, and he's just in Barry. If you watch the TV show Barry, he's so fantastic as the bland art dealer who starts off as sort of like the sympathetic guy who understands where our main character is coming from, but turns out to be, in fact, the person who has bid to steal his body because he wants his eyes. He wants to be able to see again. And that's the 2 newest performers, I think, or the 3 newest performers were Daniel Kaluuya, their main character, and then Lakeith Stanfield, who he had just done Atlanta for the first season, and he had done Short Term 12, but had not been in anything else. And Caleb Landry Jones, who just seemed to appear out of nowhere as the fantastically creepy, almost reminding me a little bit of Christopher Walken and Annie Hall, sort of getting off that weird brother vibes.
Oh, hold up. Okay, so watching this for the first time, he was a character I didn't expect. I knew he was gonna be. People told me he was super weird, and I get it, and I definitely had that vibe. Absolutely, he's absolutely super uncomfortable in so many ways, but it occurred to me he reminds me of one very iconic character, just in a very different situation. He reminded me his body language and attitude and the physicality even. It reminded me of Alex DeLarge from Clockwork Orange.
Oh, like the main character?
Like yes, if it was much more contemporary, if it was like like in a different world, if it's Alex DeLarge in a very different world.
Yeah, he's sort of got that sort of like, he's got that trickster god, like, devilish kind of trickster god kind of thing. He's very fluid with his body. It sort of almost has a dance-like quality. He talks a lot about jujitsu in this film, and he sort of has this sort of like chaos god, like the sort of Loki like sensibility to him, I feel that.
He's also always trying to prove himself in some way. He's trying to, not only to his father, but it's just his family, like, oh, I could carry him, and Rose was like, no, you can't. You've already damaged his body already. Yeah. There's like a few of those like comments where it's clear that she is the favorited.
He's the favorite child. Well, they even mentioned too that the Stephen Rowe character says that they there's different methods that the family uses to groom and find these black these black people who, again, talking about some of the themes of this movie, because we're not gonna be able to do a super long episode tonight, guys. So we want to. This is a really important movie, so we want to make sure we touch on some major themes. The idea of what this family is after is super, super important. And what it is not that they are racist in the conventional sense of they hate black people. Like, as we'd consider probably, it's funny because after watching this movie in 2021, we're like, oh, remember the time when racism kind of went to the background for a while and became about this other idea of racism, which is not like, it seemed like at the time in 2017, like that is the form of racism that's more systematic and more problematic at the time, was the kind that wasn't overt, like we hate black people, but more fetishization. Oh, that we are post-racism, and the way that racism has become systemic is in these covert ways, and everything's coded, and people covet ideas of
certain microaggressions.
Microaggressions, perfect word for it. Microaggressions, nothing that you can put your finger on. Funny enough that like we fast forward 4 years later and we're like, oh, for that glorious time when there were just microaggressions and not like people actually just being overtly racist again and stuff like that. But like the idea is that in this movie, they think this white family thinks that being black is to be preferable to being white. It's just preferable to be a white person in a black body. That's the best of both worlds. It's if you get all the physical stamina of what they consider to be the superior physical race, which is the black race, because the dad, the family's grandfather, who, as we find out, the caretaker of the house, who we think is just like the lawn guy, but turns out to be the grandfather, lost to Jackie Robinson in the 1927. It was 1927 or 1930? I
think it's 1928. I could be wrong.
1928
for the Olympics.
Yeah, for the Olympics, he lost to Jackie Robinson by like this much, and it had just ate away at his grandfather that he had a physical disadvantage because he was a white man. So he figured out a method of transferring a white man's consciousness into a black person's body, a la sort of, you want to put it like a Being John Malkovich sort of thing, but it's sort of like more of an operation. But it does involve being passive, like the person whose brain it is becoming passive. Yeah, it's just sleepy.
Yeah, it makes it as if it's like a medical procedure, which is really, which was really kind of funny. This movie is very, it's contemporary. It's supposed to be a movie that's set in today's times. However, it is very much a sci-fi film, and similar to Being John Malkovich, where it does have that sci-fi fantasy element, which I think is incredibly unique because it's not overt with like lightsabers and lasers and things like that, but it's just out of reach enough where you recognize a lot. You recognize the medical tools, you recognize the technology, the cell phones, things like that, and the terminology. Oh, I think he took a cab or Uber.
Yeah,
and it's just an interesting way to go about the sci-fi genre, especially in terms of a social thriller.
I think that's exactly right. Yeah, the idea of like a Lyft being an Uber, and then the way that the gaslighting is also so perfect in this film, because it is, like, again, like this movie. I don't think it meant to do this. It was supposed to be this movie that sort of like speaks to issues of the times and as we go forward in time. But unfortunately, we sort of spent the last 4 years going backwards in time. So this movie sits as a watermark for like what we thought meant to be a certain kind of new racist or to tackle these maybe not even racist, but like to tackle conversations about microaggressions, about things that were not overtly, gaslighting in the way that like the Trump presidency made things overtly gaslighty. Like facts aren't real, truth is false, black is white, up and down. This is a lot more nuanced of a film where like people are on the same page about certain things, but then there are other levels of it, No one's saying to be black is to be a bad person or to be black is to be lesser than. It's just saying they're saying a specifically different thing, which is the combination of a black physical body and a white mind, or if you not even a white mind, because we see there's one person, just like in Being John Malkovich, who is an Asian guy who's at the party, like a very specific one Asian dude. It might even be the same actor who's there and who's part of that like club of people who are like honestly wealthy enough to afford to be put into a different body.
I honestly thought my first thought when I saw him was it wasn't so much a wealth thing. It was more like the idea of transferring someone into a body was done originally with an Asian, possibly.
Wow.
And so I thought so my first thought was like, was that like from like was someone transferred into his body from like decades before, earlier on, from an older generation? Because that was my first thought process, because he's an older guy, just like everyone is, but I kind of put him in kind of a similar situation almost as Lakeith Stanfield's character, where he was taken over, where he was a victim.
I think it's important. The very first one that's been done was the grandfather that was put into the younger person's body. So no one that's going to be older than that character, than that groundskeeper, is going to be somebody who was brain melded into, because they find younger people. They don't go into older. They don't go. So that gentleman was like
they keep asking.
Yeah, exactly. And that there's no better in their mind. Like it goes, white people did well in America for this many years, but now it's not time for white people.
The exact line was like, in the last several hundred years, like for the past like 400 or 500.
Yeah, now they're like, it is more fashionable to be black. It's more like, it's almost like better for you in society to be black than it is to be white, probably because of like the Obama stuff and because we seem like we were in this post-race time. But it's not like these people are racist in the sense that they are like, black people shouldn't get to vote. In fact, they're like, we want to be black, but it's the idea of privilege and these conversations about privilege that I think
to be.
Yeah. Weston goes, I don't know why Eric said that like a therapist, but I can dig
it. Not in this way. I don't want to be compared to a therapist.
Robert, this movie is absolutely still racist, but I do want to draw a distinction that there's a huge distinction between the racism of being like black people don't deserve to do this, or black people are inherently worse, and the racism of privilege, which is to say, as race tourists, which is really what this movie is about. It's more like the Rachel Dolezal of it's race tour. It's using racist tourism. It's like, I want to experience life as a black person, which is a way different thing than saying black people are designed worse than white people, or less smart than white people, or less whatever. It's not putting them in that categorization. It's just saying, right now, we prefer the privilege of being black instead of we prefer the privilege of being white.
Just like with physically speaking, just like with any person, any race in particular, everyone's body is a little bit different, obviously, and different body types and skin has different reactions to the environment. Like, I would love to have a certain person's skin type or tone or something, just because like me with my, like with things that I have, I'm like, I want this person's situation and all that good stuff. But the idea of completely taking over, and like you said, with this kind of race tourism thing where you're kind of like nitpicking these things when it comes to certain races, is kind of such again, just bringing it back to the sci-fi element, is such a interesting concept.
Well, especially when you consider especially when you consider what the Stephen Root character says specifically about why he wants it, because at one point the guy's like, well, you want to get me because I'm black, man, and Stephen Root has this reaction that literally is like, how dare you? He was like, no. He's like, that don't lump me in with these fucking freaks. He doesn't say it like that, but he's like, I don't care what race you are. I want your eyes. So that's like another form of privilege, is to be like, I don't care what race you are. I don't like, it's like almost like he's like saying in a very literal way, I don't see race because I don't see anything. I'm a blind man. He's saying, I don't see, like, this isn't, and that's a form of privilege, is the ability not to see race.
It's a very, I think it's what's really great about it as well is I think the writing, it makes complete sense that this movie got an Oscar for Best Original Screenplay.
Oh my
the
God.
writing is fantastic. The 5-10 minute scene between Chris and Rose's father, Dean, is just nothing but eggs. Like Easter eggs.
Oh yeah,
nothing but eggs.
Which one? When he's going around
everything from the deer conversation into, it's like, yeah, I just couldn't let him go. Yeah, I just like, it's like everything in between, down to the wrestling, referencing the Aryan race, everything in between. It's so, and doing it so flawlessly I feel like it's very interesting as well, that you don't really see the eggs, and then you go back and watch it, and then you're like, oh my gosh.
It's when he's talking about in the basement, he's talking about the black mold, that they can't go in the basement because it's covered in black mold. And that's where he ends up that's where the surgery is.
Absolutely.
So
Nat, this is a great point that I think, thanks for bringing it up. I think the inclusion of the Asian man is so important because it speaks to the idea that Asians are considered the model minority. Oh my gosh, this is like, that's a whole thing. And where Asians fit into the racism conversation in America. Very true.
Because I think you can also talk about a little bit about like what Lakeith's character is like, because we meet Lakeith in the very beginning of the film and we watch him get abducted, and he's talking like, like Lakeith Stanfield talks, like he does in Atlanta, like he does in interviews, like he does in, he's just talking like a normal person. But when we see him again, he's wearing this little straw hat. He's talking in this very, his elocution has gotten a lot better. He's holding his body differently. He's with this older woman. He's sort of like, he's holding his body in this very strange, like sort of affected way. He's putting his arm around this very much older woman, and he's sort of walking in this very stilted manner. And we later find out, these are all coded references. It's not only because it's no longer Lakeith playing like a dude, but like a white person in Lakeith's body, but it's like all the ways that we code different things to mean a white person versus a black person. What does it mean for a white person? Yeah, he puts his hand out to fist bump, and Lakeith puts his hand over it, and it's hilarious. Like, it is hilarious.
This young man is just telling me that he feels better knowing that I'm here.
Yeah. And the way that Lakeith's face sort of lights up, because it means that he is passing. This old man and this black person is in this black person's body is very excited in this way, because he's very excited that another black person has recognized him and has tried to like connect to him, because it means that he himself is now passing as black. And that's like a very interesting and very like, meta concept about like what we as white people like think of ourselves, and like how we can like how delighted we'd be if we were passing, versus like the idea of what really passing is, which is like something you have to do because it's like a life or death situation, or because like society won't give you the benefits that you deserve inherently as a human being unless you are passing as, another race.
I feel like that's a whole conversation in and of itself. The idea that, like you said, when it comes to this race tourism idea, I wonder if that is going to be a thing one day to a certain
race
extent.
tourism. I mean, that is. I'll be honest. That's a term that I coined for when I wrote this movie. I mean, I don't think I coined it. Like, I came up with the term, but I came up with it. But I'm sure other people have come up with it and written essays about it and used it better. But like, that was just a term that I came up with when I was thinking about the movie, because I was thinking about it in terms of being John Malkovich and what the experience was in that movie, which was identity tourism, which was like you take over the body of a celebrity for 15 minutes, and it's like this experience. And the inclusion of Catherine Keener feels very important because she's the star of Being John Malkovich. She's the person in Being John Malkovich who like lets people go through the portal. There's that one Asian guy in Being John Malkovich who also is always trying to get in. Like it feels like it's a 1-to-1. And so I looked up a couple interviews, and Jordan Peele did address it at one point during a Reddit like AMA, but he's like, I didn't cast her for that reason. But then on set, when somebody pointed it out, he was like, it was kind of funny to think that this is sort of where Maxine, the character, would have ended up. Like, this is like this is a continuation of the Being John Malkovich logic. and this is like in that same universe almost.
Well, it's her character in particular is very interesting. Actually, that was actually one of my real big takeaways from this movie is that there was very few aspects of this movie I was surprised about. I knew I was going to be thrilled with the writing. I knew the cinematography was going to be great. I knew the roles, the scenes, the Easter eggs. I knew everything about it. But some of the few things I did not expect was the absolute control and terror that how I reacted to Missy's character in particular, the mother.
Okay, go on about that.
I knew it was going to be the tea thing, but I had no idea like I was going to react to her the way that I did. And the way that like it's really, and I love how all the characters end up dying the way that depending on like Jeremy, he died. He initially got hit with a botch ball, and he was the one that brought up the athleticism. And the father, he ends up dying with a deer, and he brought up the deer within their first conversation, things like that. But she ends up dying in the therapist's room in particular. And from what I've been told, Black people in particular have a very interesting history, and as far as
therapy and medication.
Absolutely. And just mental health in general. And it's just like a really complicated history there. And so by addressing it in that room in particular, where she does go through the hypnosis, and there's this whole conversation about how the white women's role in racism and starting from revolutionary period and colonial America, as well as like whole conversation. And so her being the instigator that really kicks it off per se once he arrives, because at that point he's already experienced it, but it hasn't really officially started until she kicks it off.
Yeah, right. And she is such a devastatingly effective character because she comes across as even more so than the dad, who's like sort of corny and jocular and has sort of like a strangeness about him. Like he's fun, but he's like strange and he's a little bit goofy, and you can sort of put him in a villain role. I mean, it's hard to think of it like, when you meet them, even if you know what's coming, it's really hard to imagine them as the bad guys, and that's sort of the point, because they are so overly welcoming. Because even if you know what's coming, you're still expecting them to be hostile towards them, because it's a boy coming home to meet your parents. Like they're not expecting them to be so friendly, so welcoming. And beyond that she is so, I think you used the word control, right? That she has so much restraint, that she is so not pediatrician, that's what I'm looking for. Patriarchal, not patriarchal, but almost like she has this sort of, therapist air, where if you go to therapy a lot, or if you've been in therapy, like that sort of restraint, that's sort of how, keeping it all inside and keeping it all to oneself, and that she's going to help him quit smoking by putting him under hypnosis. And yes, there's been throughout history, there's been huge instances of minorities being experimented on, of being, used by doctors of various types, but especially mental health doctors, to experiment new things on. And, it's why a lot of minorities are not comfortable with like the idea of vaccines right away, because historically vaccines have been tested on, minority cultures, and that goes for the Jews and, Europe during World War II, that goes for Black people in America. I mean, it just goes on and on. But so she, in this role of somebody who's supposed to be a caretaker, who's supposed to be helping you work through your mental problems, which she ostensibly does, like she gets him in touch with what his sunken place really is, and why he was so scared of that fear. It's funny because it's not like she doesn't do anything for him. She does get him to quit smoking, and she does get him to sort of face his big fear that he's been uncomfortable and like unwilling to address, which is what exactly happened with his mother and what he felt like his part in it was. Unfortunately, that doesn't do anything like when she's like traumatized you, or like, hypnotized you into having a trigger where if she clicks her thing against the glass, you immediately fall into a hypnotic state. Which, by the way, I always wondered, like, would that continue? Like, is anytime someone's going to clink that thing against the glass, is he going to just fall into like a trance?
Well, yeah, I think it's kind of interesting. I've had so many friends being like, after that, they had a hard time looking at a cup of tea the same way, and that the way that cup of tea was weaponized the way it was. It's truly terrifying.
I'm currently saying
It's
I'm currently saying it at my
like,
friend's parents. I'm like being constantly. I'm constantly trying to get some tea, and I'm like, no, 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 no.
it's really it's creepy now. I actually stopped. But anyway, so one of it watching this movie, like I don't want to like obviously I do not want to read fan fiction or anything regarding the family or anything, but I'm really interested about the history and mythology behind this family. I'm really curious because they feel like I feel like honestly
feels like a real
interesting. Yeah, there's a real interesting dynamic to this family. They need each other to complete this situation.
It's a family.
Yeah. And it seems like they were kind of groomed. It seems like a very specific to this certain community. And obviously you need a certain amount of money. You need a certain level of skills, high level skills
to even be
in order to do this successfully.
Yeah, not only that, but even to be considered one of the people, one of these subjects that they groom, you need to have not just be a Black person. They're not just taking Black people off the street. It's like they have a different grooming process for Rose versus the brother. But it's like, you know, they pick Chris because he is superlative. He's not just Black, although, and it's not just because of his body, although like the brother seems to imply that like if he tried jujitsu and he did it a certain way, it would look, you know, like he'd be a master of jujitsu. But it's like that scene with the bingo cards where they're holding up the numbers, and it's so creepy because they're having a silent bingo auction. You don't know what they're doing.
And they said, "Oh, we're gonna play bingo next," because they knew he wasn't gonna want to participate. So the very conscious thought process behind selecting that verbiage is very interesting.
We're gonna play bingo, exactly. Well, the whole party is just so creepy. Like, you know, when he goes upstairs and everyone stops talking. So there's no point in this movie where if you watch the trailer of this movie, because I know you came in like knowing a lot of stuff, but to be clear, if you came into the movie going to Get Out and you'd seen the trailers or heard any buzz whatsoever, you knew that like this family wasn't on the level. You weren't going to see it. You weren't seeing a comedy. Like we were all aware that there was something wrong and that it was going to be race related and it was going to be involving this family. So, but because, you know, it was in the trailers, everyone stops talking when he goes upstairs. There was something very wrong, but you just didn't know what.
Absolutely. That scene by itself actually reminded me so much of the movie Stepford Wives, the original Stepford Wives. And not only the conversation behind gaslighting, but the conversation but this idea that people have no life outside of you. Like the moment you leave a room, it goes quiet. And because in the original, there's a handful of scenes where that's the case. The moment the husband leaves, the girls just die down. You know, and it's just kind of it's really funky. And I understand there's a handful of movies, classic horror films and thrillers that were a direct influence. Night of the Living Dead, whose protagonist is a really fantastic Black man. He's a leader, ends up unfortunately getting shot at the last scene, which freaked me out when I saw it for the first time. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? That's not a thriller, obviously, but it's the same concept. This movie's is that with a horror spin, and it's Jordan Peele, who was very vocal about a lot of the cinematography and the writing story elements of these are directly influenced.
And remember, the gaslighting is a term that we come up with because there's a film, a 1930s film called Gaslight, which is about which is about a woman who is being gaslit, which is that she is being told that she's going crazy because she sees lights wherever, like she sees lights during the night, and people and her husband saying, "No, you're not. Like you're going crazy." But in fact, he's lighting gas. He's lighting gas things on the stove, and he's lighting gas lamps and stuff around the house, and telling her that she's going nuts to make her believe that she's gone insane. Yeah. So like that's only to say, Weston, that there was this movie wasn't. No one came into this movie being like shocked that it turned out to be a horror film. That's my only point here, is that no one was confused that this was a horror film going in. No one's seen Get Out, but they think it's going to be like a comedy, and we weren't like, oh my god, I couldn't believe that turned out to be a horror film.
Well, it's funny you say that because I mean, this movie is it's very genre bending. It's very clearly horror thriller, but it's also very much a Black comedy. It's very much a family drama
It is
as
very funny.
well. And and depending on what situation you sit in, I've heard some people say it flat out is aggressively a Black comedy with horror elements, and I've
Mhm.
also heard the exact opposite, saying it is straight up an aggressive horror with Black comedy elements.
Oh, yeah, and I don't think
And
the stories
so
are opposite. I think
it's
that's, like, different shades
yeah,
of
but
the same thing.
I've heard people argue both ways, and so
Yeah.
it's really interesting to see. Like when I like looking back and I'm hearing some of these people say, "Oh yes, Black comedy," I'm like, "What?"
Anyway, it's got some really funny moments. This movie is aggressively funny.
It's a Black comedy with horror elements. Are you kidding me? No,
I would say
it's
that
a horror movie.
it's, well, I think it's like two half. I mean, those are like those are very like minute characterizations. It is a very dark comedy. I mean, the lines are hysterically funny from the Get Out. Like, I mean, it's from the Get Out, from the get go. Like, it's just hilarious. It's beat after beat. It's ran like a comedy. So I could see you saying that, but it's like, there's horror comedies. They're just both. Like, there's Cabin in the Woods is a horror comedy. I would classify this as a social, like it's a social horror comedy.
Yeah, it's definitely a social horror, social thriller for sure.
I think sort of Black comedy, horror, thriller is like exactly where this lies. I wouldn't put one over the other because they're sort of intermixed. Like,
Absolutely.
it's both a social commentary, it's both a Black comedy, and it's also like, I mean, horror is almost like the nebulous word here because horror implies a supernatural element that, like, maybe you want to give this movie, or maybe you want to say it's more of a social thriller because it's not a supernatural thing, because it's more just like a thing that we don't have yet. Like, having this, it's not like they have magic. It's like they have a thing that doesn't exist, which is an ability to, it's like saying Tenet is a horror movie when just because it has elements of things that don't exist yet, when it's like a thriller.
Well, there are aspects of this movie. Well, one of the I definitely agree with you. There are aspects. I thing is, I never laughed out loud watching this movie.
Really? Oh,
And so,
really?
yeah, not
It's a funny
once.
movie.
And I didn't but there were a few moments where I was like, "That's a comedic cue," because of the music. And
Really?
it's kind of funny because, no pun intended, but it's kind of funny how the music in particular, that's another thing that I wasn't prepared for. The score was fantastic. The soundtrack was really, really wonderful. The song selection in the opening scene, I was very surprised how much I really loved.
Mhm.
And the score made it feel that much more like a classic horror movie. It felt like something from the 50s, 60s in
Mhm.
terms of classic horror, and the moments the party, the handful of the party scenes, they could be played a very much more in a comedic or a horror comedic tone, but because of the tone of the music in particular, I picked up on a handful of things I didn't think about before.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
actually it
I mean,
reminded me
usually,
of what's his name? Oh gosh, who's the actor that was like House of Wax, and he did a whole bunch of like House on Haunted Hill.
wait, the actor who did House on Haunted
Yeah,
Hill?
the
Vincent
actor.
Price?
What? Vincent
Vincent
Price.
Price?
Yes, it reminded me of a Vincent Price horror movie
Mhm.
in a lot of
But
ways,
it's much
especially the
the
score.
song, the Run Rabbit song that they play in the opening. The one that's like,
Mhm,
run, rabbit,
mhm.
run, run, run. Yeah, I mean, that's also very evocative of Brer Rabbit, which is a very race
Yeah.
specific
And also it's a
Disney
nice
song of the
little
South thing.
cue to his movie that's later gonna come up with rabbits, which is Us,
Mhm.
with
Well, yeah,
rabbits
Black people
everywhere.
and Brer Rabbit is like that's a very loaded image, and
Mhm,
the idea of like Black people as rabbits, Black people as experiment, Black people as, the tar
mhm.
baby in Brer Rabbit. I mean, it's very evocative, and it's supposed to be very evocative of like Song of the South and stuff like that.
Yeah,
It's just really, the whole movie is just loaded with symbolism and cues and all this
mhm.
stuff that is so layered and so complex that of course we're not going to be able to get it all through tonight. But I want to know, like, we've been on this for a little bit, but like, what were some of your favorite, characters or lines or scenes from this?
Again, my favorite character would have to be Missy Armitage, just because every time she was on screen, I couldn't stop looking at her. I had to,
Mhm.
the entire time I was like, "What is she doing? What is her motivations?
Mhm.
How is how does a woman come to be in this situation. And I honestly think this family is a matriarch. This is matriarchy. I think she's the leader of the family. What is the motivation? It's and I know it's not her father.
Yes, it's like not her family.
It wasn't her, it's his.
She's the in-law.
But it feels very much like her. She is very quiet, but she's very reserved, and she's very held back in a lot of different ways with her body language and
well, and also we know that we also know that there was no procedure before they got her and her ability to hypnotize, because before, first of all, the guy's just way too young. The person that they put the grandfather in, which is the first experiment, was the guy experimented on himself. So that's the first one. They hadn't done it yet. Well, when we see this video of him talking about the procedure, they hadn't yet done the procedure. Like when they made the little video that they're watching, they hadn't yet done it because the grandfather is still the grandfather.
I don't think that's the case. To me, it was more like that wasn't the first case. That was just they discovered a way to make it easier. They discovered doing these medical procedures. They were doing it before the hypnosis on anyone they could.
But the grandfather specifically was the guy who wanted the procedure first. There was nobody who wanted it. White guy.
My thought process was that he's not the first body he's been in.
But he is, because he's the one that went to the Olympics, and that's where he got the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the thing is, but that the groundskeeper, the body that he was put in, he was a younger man. He wasn't like in his 20s, but he definitely looked like he was in his early 40s. And so I do think that he might have been put into a new body a few times. And the first time, possibly, he might have been put into a new body in the 70s, a second body, but then he was put into possibly another body in the 90s or something along those lines.
That's an interesting theory. I'm just not so sure.
That was just my thought process. Like, the first time was experimental, then they did hypnosis, and they realized how much easier it was by including this hypnosis process.
Well, when we see the video of her, of them talking to the camera and saying, "This is what you're about to experience," Rose and her brother are already born. So and you see the video at the end. You see the whole family. So you see there's the grandpa and grandma, and we see Catherine Keener is already with the husband, and they already have 2 kids together. I do think it is instrumental that she's involved. I think her involvement probably was the final clicking thing in place to make this all work. Because I don't think, like, before that, like, how would you get somebody to stand still? How would you get their body not to reject it? How would you get their mind into the sunken place? The sunken place is so pivotal to what this movie is trying to say about race and what it's trying to say about what this would be, which is like in Being John Malkovich, it's this whole thing, which is like, if you get the body at the right time, then the original spirit or soul or whatever will be pushed to the back and you can take control. And if you're a puppeteer, like Craig's character was, like, you will be able to manipulate the body past the point where the 15 minutes where you're supposed to be up. This movie kind of gets rid of all that and is like, no, the soul would fight you off, and the soul does try to fight you off if it ever gets bright enough light flashed in its eyes, like Lakeith does with the pop, or like the grandfather does at the end. If you get a bright light flash in your eyes, the original self is able to sort of push out or struggle against this part of the brain that's been inserted inside of you. But
well, is it just any bright light, or is that just specific like to a flash?
I think it's specifically a flash, like an epileptic seizure would have.
Would that apply? If it was lightning, would that count?
It might, because it's like
or a car light.
Yeah, it might.
Like, can they drive?
There are people drive, but I think it's specifically a strobing light. Like, if photosensitive people, it's like if you do a TikTok and it's like, don't look at this app, don't look at this filter because it's photosensitive. Like, people have epileptic seizures, and I think it's supposed to be along that continuum, that you can be sort of, snapped out of, like, just like you would in hypnosis, you can be snapped out of it by anything that's a strobing light effect. So these people would have to avoid, raves, hypothetically. But they're 70-year-olds in the body of 20-year-olds. They probably don't want to go to a lot of raves. I mean, the idea of what they would want to do as a Black person running around this world would not involve actually physically doing a lot of running around, but rather using it to extend your life, or like what the grandfather does. Well, he quite literally runs around, but he doesn't like want to parties. It's not like he has the brain of a 19-year-old man. He just has the body of one who wants to keep training. That's why he's running late at night, because he's trying to train. He's trying to Jackie Robinson's abilities, and now that he has the body of a Black person.
Well, even Dean Armitage, the father, he like mentions in this little monologue towards the end that he compares them to gods. We are gods in these bodies situation, and it would be horrible for us to just waste away. And it's a really kind of a really scary moment. And like him, he's Chris, he's like keys, and he's just like, oh my gosh, it's just like it's really kicking in.
Oh yeah, that moment was like demanding keys more. And what's so great about
that was probably my scariest moment in the movie, where I didn't jump, but I was just like, oh, any minute now.
No, that's like, I think what makes that moment so scary is that it's also Chris's behavior, because at that moment, like, Chris no longer, like, the polite facade of like what you're able to get away with because you're just kind of pushing somebody in a microaggressive sense. Like when he starts barking at Rose, it's that moment where you almost want to be like, oh no, don't like yell at her in front of her parents. Like, you're putting on a bet. Like, that's gonna, you still, even though you know that he's in danger, you as a subject are like, oh, don't raise your voice to the daughter. Like, while her parents are there, like, that's going to make you look bad. Like, you still have that coded into you.
But absolutely. Yeah, there is that idea as well. And
from being an angry Black man in front of her parents, you know?
It's a very white luxury.
Yeah,
for sure. What was I thinking? Yeah, so at that point, that moment in the film, it's very clear that everyone is playing with him, including Rose. She is active. He's like where everyone's kind of slowly closing in. He realizes he can't leave the house, and he's constantly like, Rose the entire time, keys.
Yeah.
And
she's acting like she can't find them.
She's just stalling because she can.
And we know that it's so funny you say that, because when we watched the movie the first time, we know that she's in on it because he's opened this little tiny door in the upstairs attic, which is again being John Malkovich like. This is tiny door, and it's revealed that she has these photos of her with every single, or her with like the groundskeeper, her with the maid who turns out to be the grandma. So she's been bringing people in by sort of being the honeypot. She like dates these Black people, sometimes women, sometimes men, and brings them to the house where they get hypnotized, and then the transference happens. So we know that she's in on it. But yet, even watching the movie the first time, I thought she wasn't when they got down the stairs, and she was so rummaging around for her keys and like being like, I can't find them. Like, I really thought for some, like, maybe they brainwiped her. I thought she wasn't in on it. She was playing it so good until that one moment.
Well, that's the thing. I disagree. I will think it's not so much I disagree. The thing is, I am also, like I said, I'm incredibly biased going into this because I'm actively looking for her ingenuity. I mean, like sorry, not ingenuity. That's not the right word. I'm looking for her to be dishonest overall, and then because she never feels truly warm with him. And I thought maybe it's more of the acting. Maybe
she's very patrician like.
Yeah, and I mean that's just the way it kind of really comes across, where it just never felt very genuine, the relationship, and all these bursts of emotions that really would ever come forward, they're from his side, not her. And because to me from the get-go, I felt like she was actively, I feel like she's kind of like her mother in the way where not only is she the clear favorite, but she actively likes to mess with these men. These people.
It's one of my favorite scenes.
I think she's a sociopath.
I really like what you see her doing at the end of the movie before she goes out to find out like what's happened with Chris. Is she's upstairs, she's eating individual Apple Jacks, but she has a bowl of Apple Jacks and she's eating milk. And she's taking each individual Apple Jack, eating it, drinking a sip of milk, and looking at future NBA stars, like people that are like grooming next boyfriends, and basically looking at like the team of like upcoming NBA people.
Not only that, you can also see
the serial thing is also a reference to another Jordan Peele sketch from Key and Peele that's very funny. It's called The Continental Man, where it's a very funny sketch where it's Jordan Peele and he's going to a continental breakfast at a hotel, and he's trying all the different little foods, and he gets a little thing of Apple Jacks and a thing of milk, and he's like, but he's doing it in a very particular like num 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 kind of way. He's like, from Greek yogurt from the lands of Greece, where like yogurt runs through the streets, and he's like, mind if I do? And he's eating this little tiny cherry, like a little grape, and he's like, oh, a tiny plum, nom nom nom. And he's like being very weird about it, but it's just a very visual. But the idea of like her being anal in that very specific way is very funny. It's very white. It's very
Oh, well, it's not so much. I didn't see it as being anal or anything like that. It was just the idea. Well, the thing is, I also thought it was very. Yeah, it was Fruitless without the milk. It was really weird. But I was very surprised because suddenly she's like turns it on.
Mm-hmm.
She turns it off and then she turns it on. Like I was very surprised watching this. Like she has sex. She has sex with Chris and as well as with anyone else that she ends up befriending. But she decides that she is able to kind of turn on this mode in herself. She's able to fake it for the right reasons, like what she thinks is the right reason.
Is attracted to.
Once the mission is complete.
Well, we get this very interesting story about her, don't we? About like when she's younger, about what her first making out session was like, where she bit a dude's lip, or she bit a dude's tongue off because she was scared. I mean, that's about the kind of person she is sexually.
I honestly, God, think that she went on her first mission to get a boy when she was in high school. I think that's the implication. That's the thing. I know Jordan Peele, he described her saying that Allison is the way her character is supposed to come off across as like that girl at summer camp or band camp that you had a huge crush on, but you end up forgetting about her, but you see her like 10 years later and then you come across each other again and you like bond immediately, but something's off.
Mm-hmm.
It's supposed to be very similar to that.
Mm-hmm. It's like a grown-up version of like this idealized girl. She's a grown-up version of this ideal that you have, that you never really knew her. She's sort of like a cipher more than she's a person, but she represents a bunch of things to you. And so you project a lot of things onto her.
And she even brings it up where even with his best friends, like, or she's trying to manipulate the conversation. It's like, oh, I know you watched it. You want to have sex with me, don't you?
It was such a crazy conversation, huh? And he's like, that crazy white bitch. And what did you think of his character before we move on? I'll break.
Yeah, he was really funny. He was a really funny character. I know he's a really great comedian. I've heard a handful of his comedy specials. I totally forgot he was in this movie, and I knew he came at the very end. He was a TV agent, TSA agent. I knew everything going into like regarding his character, but I didn't expect the necessary breath of fresh air, the comedic relief that his character really brought to the movie, which I didn't realize I needed.
Yeah, so you were like, just like, yes,
up, but also that even though they're comedic in tone because they're performed by this comedic actor, there is a real seriousness and terror to it, because at the end of the day, he's trying to solve this potential crime. He's trying to figure out what's wrong with his friend, what happened.
Little Ray, that's his name, Little Ray.
No one's believing him, and he's just like here with this dog, trying to figure it out.
I love him. You know, originally the movie ended very differently, or actually, it began very differently. The movie originally began. No, it's ending. It didn't start at the beginning. It didn't start with the ending. So no, it ended with a different ending. Can you imagine what that ending was? Can you imagine what the ending was? What? It ends with him in prison. And you gotta imagine that, like, when you saw this movie in theaters and you heard those cops sound sirens at the end, you knew exactly where you thought this movie was going. Like, you're like, oh, well, people are dead. This black guy's gonna go to jail.
Well, that's the thing. I remember because I watched this and with Lucas, and at the very end, and he's like, and I told him, I was like, that because this isn't a sci-fi, this isn't this kind of a weird sci-fi fantasy world where this is doable. I'm like, I'm gonna assume this is an alternate sci-fi fantasy world where fingerprints aren't available, things like that.
Imagine this though. Imagine like all she did though. Remember in the beginning when she gets the cop not to take his license? Like she made sure to cover the tracks so no one knew that he was there.
However, but his fingerprints were there. And
not only that, but they had a huge fucking party, and a bunch of people were witnesses, and people know who was supposed to be there. Like
And
people
he
know
told
that was
he
Chris.
told his friends that where he was going as well.
Not only that, but like there's a whole party of people that are complicit inside this arranged environment that all know that he was supposed to be the victim, all saw him on the property, and all can pretty much game out what happened. They all know, like, what probably they can figure out what happened. He killed them because he was
And
experiment.
they could easily all these people could band together and be like, that guy was the what he.
But I think
Yeah,
in this
no
world,
one's gonna believe the situation.
I think
But
what they
I
wanted from that is that they wanted. And by the way, it still could happen. We don't see past that night. We don't see past that night, so that could have happened. I think the point here that what I read in the interview is that the issue was with changing it is that he felt like he didn't want to bring it past that and try to make a commentary past that one evening. So adding the idea of the threat of the sirens is enough to make people understand where this night would eventually go and like what would happen in reality. But he wanted to end it on a more of a comedic beat. And after going it over, yeah.
On a lighter note.
Lighter note, but like one that implies exactly what's supposed to happen, because like she says, "Help me," and then there's the sirens, and she reaches out and goes, "Help me," and you know exactly what that would look like and what would happen in reality. But you know, and it's almost like when I saw this movie the first time, I thought it was going to be like a Brazil thing, where it turns out he's just imagining that's what happened, and in fact, he's still trapped in his mind, and like his body was taken over, because it is such a fantasy that his friend would be the one that finds him, and the friend stole like a cop car, I guess. And like when he asked his friends how it happened, his friend's just like, "I'm the TS motherfucking A." Like that's such a fantasy, you know?
Yeah, I like to think in this fantasy world, this is the way it's going to go. But also, I'm incredibly grateful that it ended on this somewhat positive note as well, because this movie is all about tension, and it's dark, and it's a really deep film with a lot of subtext, with almost exclusively subtext, it feels like, looking back. But
yeah, so I want to ask you, did you, even though you hadn't seen it before and you knew everything about it, you know, having seen it for the first time, do you think it holds up, Alex? Like, what would you say about it?
I think it does hold up. I'm really curious to see how this movie is gonna age in like 20, 30 years as well. It's gonna be studied in schools. It's gonna be. I'm excited to talk to this about, like, with if I were out of kids, I'd be excited to share this with them. I'm excited to have conversations about this movie in the future. So it's, as a result, I mean, it's hard not for it to hold up overall.
I agree. I mean, I think this is one of those films that you want to show everybody, and like it is funny to watch it 5 years after it came out and being like, wow, like yeah, they were voting for Obama the third time. Like the threat is now so different than we thought it was going to be, and the threat of like what this country is going through and like how we deal with race is so different that this almost seems like a utopian version of what the racism was looking like back in the day. It sucks, but like that's it. Like that's how it feels. It feels like that's utopic. Now that we're going back to the idea of like Nazis running around and riots at the Capitol and people just yelling the N-word all the time, it feels like the ideas of racism and race tourism that are brought up in this movie are idealized versions of what racism in America looks like.
Again, that's why I think the ending of this movie is wonderful, because it ends on not a comedic. It does end up on technically a comedic tone, but it's not a moment where I laugh. It's a moment where it allows you as the audience to breathe in a moment, because up until then, for the past 10 minutes prior, 10, 15 minutes, I couldn't breathe. I just so filled with tension and legitimate terror in quite a few of those scenes. And so by ending on a lighter note, in theory, it just makes me feel not only that sense of relief, but it also allows the audience to kind of feel this sense of, oh, it will be better, a sense of optimism before the end. And that's what I hope is one of the takeaways from this movie, is that this is a horrible situation we are in now, and we will be for an indeterminate amount of time, but at some point we will get through this. There will be an ending where everyone is happy, ideally, and that's just the optimal situation.
I mean, happy is like a funny way to put it because like I don't know if Chris is going to be able to go back and like date more white women ever again.
Drink tea.
But I think oh, she's so sweet, guys. By the way, if you haven't seen it yet, this is our little baby that we're getting us from wonderful. Hey, sweetie. Where's my little baby? So yeah, so I think this is a great movie. I'm glad we watched it. Do we know what's coming up next week on our third week here of sort of pushing ourselves out of our comfort zone and watching movies that are specifically about I mean, the whole cinema bias is about pushing ourselves out of the comfort zone, but specifically about dealing with issues of race and the Black experience. For next week's movie, we are going to be watching Superfly, which is a 70s movie, I believe. It's sort of like
it's from like
the vibe of Dolomite, I believe.
Yeah, so Superfly is Superfly is actually from 1972. It was actually recently remade in 2018, but it has several really iconic characters with Priest, Eddie, Georgia, Fat Eddie, and it really centers on a drug dealer, Priest, who is just trying to move up and...
He's a priest?
No, his name is Priest.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's one of the most iconic blaxploitation films. It's definitely one of the more iconic Black films of the 70s as well. It's very influential. If you ever seen like Shaft, if you ever seen Jackie Brown, it's a huge influence from this movie in particular.
Mm-hmm. So guys, that's gonna be our movie. I'm just playing a picture of it real quick. That's gonna be our movie for next week. When things we'll be back I'll be back in my normal home, so things will be back to looking a little bit more normal, and we will have the Streamlabs up and ready to go and stuff like that. But otherwise, guys, you can always find out more about what we were watching and what we were doing over on Letterboxd, where we have Cinema Bias. With me now to have Cinema Bias lists on Letterboxd, so you can always take a look over there. And where can people find you, Alex?
You can find me up there on Twitter at @real_AlexMack. You can also find me being part of the Call to Action podcast, where we dive into movies, we dive into Schmoedown. I host a show called Schmoebates, where we dive into Schmoedown debates in particular. And I'm excited. It's gonna be fun. I'm gonna be moving over the next month or so. So I am gonna be putting Schmoebates on hold. I'm sorry.
You're moving again?
Mm-hmm.
I thought you just found a house.
We moved to this place just so we can figure some stuff out and just like move to another location.
Gotcha,
because our lease was up and we were told that we had to leave our last place by a certain date. So we actually just got this place for only 3-4 months.
Gotcha.
But yeah, so we're gonna be driving down to DC tomorrow morning. So it's gonna be a busy day.
Wait, Washington DC?
Mm-hmm.
From St. Louis?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oh wow, that's crazy. Okay, so that's right. You're doing our road trip. That's why today's been a little different. I forgot about that. We usually do Cinema Bias on Tuesdays. I forgot what day of the week it is. It is Monday. So yeah, you can usually find us here on Tuesday. So that's where we'll find our show. Next week is going to be on Tuesday. You can find me over at VideoDrew. It's one word. I'm so on social media. Everything is VideoDrew. I do VideoChronic pop culture quizzes on this channel on Monday and Thursday nights with NerdChronic usually. So I'm not sure if we're going to do one tomorrow to make up for the one we missed today, but I'll keep you guys in the loop about that. You can also find me on my Patreon, patreon.com/VideoDrew, which is also where you can go and if you're part of the community there and sign up for a tier level, you can suggest a movie for Cinema Bias and come on and talk to us about it. You can suggest quiz ideas. You can come to study sessions because I am a competitor as well on the movie trivia Schmoedown. I'll be playing for the dungeon again this year, which is going to be really fun. It's Moose Day, says Weston. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We forgot to play I forgot to do the little intro video. I keep forgetting to do the intro video. We have this great one. You know what? Instead of doing it at the beginning, I'm going to play the intro video at the end and then also play the credits. So thank you guys for joining us. Get ready for this intro video and just imagine at the beginning of the show. Okay, bye.